What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bizrat for Africa. So, today we're looking at a video of someone sharing their reasons why they chose to leave Christianity. And so, what we're going to examine in this video are the 3 points that she puts forward, saying or stating why she actually thinks that there's reason or merit for people to leave Christianity on the basis of these 3 reasons. Now, in my previous video, I shared a video of people who were saying they're leaving Ubungoma. And they stated their reasons. They stated that this was an anti God sort of way of doing things, that it wasn't really drawing you to your ancestors, but really there were spirits that were involved. We know also that there's also a bit of dark practices that involve human body parts. There's witchcraft, there's things like isqito. There's a number of things that a lot of Christians or people who leave Ubungoma to become Christians begin to see that actually it's not what I've been promised. Actually, there's something else. There's a dark world out there. Now, in this video, you're going to find someone who's saying that there's darkness in Christianity, and therefore, this is why she practically left. Now, we're going to examine if this is the darkness of Christianity. In other words, can we say that this is linked to Jesus Christ? This is linked to a principle in Jesus Christ. This is a biblical principle. Or maybe this is maybe just human beings, and maybe cause the question for all of us to say, should we leave our religion or beliefs on the basis of what the leaders are doing, what the pastors are doing, what the sangomas are doing? Or do we reject it because there's a principle that invites people to do things that are dark? So that's what we're examining really in this particular video. So we're going to have a look and hear what my sister has to say. And I want to say that if you're a Christian as well, it's important that we listen very carefully to these arguments, not just so that we respond, but that we also understand where these things come from, because these things don't come from the sky. They don't come from the air. When people say they want to leave the church, it's not always just on the basis that these are just sinful people who are doing, who love the world and hate God. But actually, there's some darkness that has been practiced in the name of Christianity. And the church must do well to pay attention to these things so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. So let's check this video out, and then we'll give some commentary as we go.
There's quite a lot of issues when it comes to Christianity. I'm going to highlight the following points, 3 things specifically. I want to talk about how Christianity is anti-Black and rooted in racism. Secondly, I want to talk about how religion divides us even further as people. And lastly, how it makes us look for help or for salvation or being saved outside of ourselves, or how we are made to think that God is outside of us. I'll explain further. So let's start with how Christianity is anti-Black and rooted in racism. For those that don't know, the Atlantic slave trade, when Africans were stolen from Africa, was facilitated by the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is as rich as it is. It has so much because of the money they were able to create from stealing people and placing them in other countries or other parts of the world. By stealing Africans, they were able to become so rich. So how do you now subscribe to a religion that did so much harm to your people? So for me as a Black person, it's difficult to grasp the concept of Christianity. Like, how do I believe in a God that doesn't really protect me, that doesn't really care for me the way that this God actually cares for, like, white people, for example? So things like that always sprung up in my mind. And when I decided to walk away, I was able to really rationalize these thoughts, and it was easier for me to walk away. As a Black person, I never felt seen. The Black experience was never acknowledged in the Jehovah's Witness religion, and I still feel.
So I want to just quickly come in here, and she said quite a mouthful of things, and maybe just let's start with the idea of Christianity being anti-Black. It's very important that we understand that Christianity can never be defined by what European Christians do. I think somehow we give so much power to European Christianity, in that whatever European Christianity has done somehow is definitive of all of Christianity in all of history. I think that's very important that we don't sort of promote white supremacy when we only take the version of Christianity maybe that comes from Europe. And so if European Christianity says white people are superior and we can justify this using the Bible, let's just take that as one interpretation of the Bible. But is this how the Bible is always interpreted by all Christians? Is this how Peter, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and Paul interpreted Christianity? Is there a verse maybe in the Bible that says, the Bible is anti-black? If you look at all of Scripture, you'll see, for an example, in Revelations chapter 7, that when John looks up in heaven, he sees a multitude of people who come from all races and all tribes. It doesn't say that they were white people and there was a white Jesus on the throne. It absolutely doesn't tell us that, right? All of these things are things that are modern. We look at verses like Ephesians chapter 6. For an example, a lot of people like to go there and say, well, look, the Bible says slaves obey your masters. But does the Bible say black slaves obey your masters? See, how do we draw that conclusion that verse is directed at something that would happen 1,500 years later? Because we're not talking about African slaves when the Bible is talking about that verse, or when Paul is addressing the issue of slavery in the church. So why do we then take every verse in the Bible about slavery and quickly apply it to us as if the word slave means African? So this is, for me, one of the reasons why a lot of Africans are actually still trapped. This is one of the mess ups that happened with the whole idea of slavery and colonization, is that people took on the identity of a slave so that whenever that word is used, it is directly applied to Africans, as if Africans were the only people in history who've ever been enslaved, as if Africans themselves never took part in the transatlantic slave trade. We know that there were African kingdoms and tribes who played a part in slavery, who sold off other Africans. For an example, you would have watched the movie Woman King, for an example. If you watch that movie, you'll see that there were African tribes that were complicit in this, the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana. A lot of them played a part the same way that the Catholic Church played a part, the same way that the Catholic Church benefited and got money. There were African kingdoms and kings who practiced African indigenous spirituality and benefited from selling other Africans. So do we then say African spirituality is anti-black because there were individuals that participated in it and benefited from it? So I would say that the argument is actually not sustained, because even if you look at, we always like to go back to Egypt and say Egypt was one of the greatest kingdoms. We had this empire, we had philosophy, we have this, but we also had slavery there, right? There's evidence of slavery in Egypt way before slavery was found anywhere. In Christianity in Europe, it was there in Africa. The pharaohs practiced it. They went to different nations, they conquered them, they brought the people they conquered, they used them as slaves. So do we then go back in history and also take that and then use that as something that says African spirituality is false? So it's a lot more complex than just picking out maybe what the Roman Catholic Church did or what white people did. But we have to look at the whole thing and go, in the whole entirety of history, did black people participate in slavery? Absolutely. Did black people own slaves? Yes. Did black people sell other Africans in slavery? Absolutely. Did black people benefit from it? Absolutely. And were those black people Christians? No, they practiced African spirituality. So that's very important for us to understand. And I think also Christianity can never be defined by Europe, because we still have Ethiopia as one of the nations that have always been Christian. They've practiced Christianity, and they were symbol of black resistance during colonization and slavery. A lot of slaves in America looked at Ethiopia as a sense of hope to say, man, I'm not defined by this, because there's a nation that was able to withstand colonization and slavery, and it happens to be a Christian nation. So we cannot define all of Christianity with just the Roman Catholic Church or Western Europe or what the missionaries did. There are other Christians even who played a major part in the liberation of Africans. You look at people in the civil rights movement, majority of them were Christians. In fact, the civil rights movement in America that was fighting for the rights of African people was born in the church, spearheaded by Dr. King Jr. And so, what do we say about those people? If that was something that was commissioned by Christ, we would see the early disciples of Christianity doing exactly that. But in fact, we see the complete opposite. I mean, imagine if Christianity was true on the basis of what white people did, of what white Christians. So I'd never mind what all the black people, never mind what the early African church fathers that shaped Christian theology. Let's just censor all those people and just say, no, the white man has all the authority. So if he's a Christian, he must define Christianity. Don't you think that is another way that we are promoting white supremacy, when we just want to hear the white voices when it comes to Christianity and censor everyone else? So we cannot fight racism and then promote it at the same time. And this is what we do really when we try and define Christianity with just colonialism. Now, this is not to say that those things weren't evil. Those things are absolutely evil. The Bible speaks completely against it. Bible is very clear that we mustn't kidnap people. We mustn't slave trade. In fact, 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 and 9 upwards, very clear that slave holders are people who don't have sound doctrine. These are people who are put on the same level as people who kill their fathers and mothers and so on. So these are people who are seen as immoral. So even in the Bible, we can't even take verses that maybe seem to promote an agenda of enslavement, but take the whole Bible and all the verses in the Bible that even talk about or speak against slavery. But let's watch a little bit further.
Feels the same within Christianity. I feel like when you become a Christian, you really forsake a lot of what it means to be Black, Ubuntu, we unlearn a lot of those things. So walking away from Christianity as a Black person for me was just a no-brainer that, this is not for me, honestly. I think it's for another race of people. I think it'll benefit them. But for me specifically, it's just not going to work. So now let's get into Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the concept that I am because you are. We live within community. And one thing I love about Ubuntu is that it's also at the center of African spirituality. African spirituality encapsulates what it means to be an African and to live in harmony with nature, with people, in community, everything. And that is Ubuntu as well. I am because you are. So those two concepts, African spirituality and Ubuntu, for me, really, really resonates with me as a person. And I realized that Christianity just lacks all of this. African spirituality welcomes people however they may be. You can be trans, you can be gay, you can be a lesbian, you can be any.
So before she goes in all sorts of directions, talking about how inclusive African spirituality is, it's very important that we understand that the Bible in and of itself is not anti-African. It's not anti any particular group of people, but it's anti things that are ungodly. That's what the Bible always speaks against. Now, when it comes to Ubuntu, you'll find that people like Desmond Tutu often referred to Ubuntu as a concept, and he was a Christian. He wasn't anti-Black, the same way that Christianity is not anti-Black. In fact, if you look at Jesus when he's talking about the Beatitudes, he's talking about the Sermon on the Mount, he mentions that we should love our enemies, we should love our neighbors, and that is absolutely what Ubuntu is all about. And in fact, Ubuntu is actually, for me, is actually more in the line of Christianity than it is in the line of African spirituality. Because African spirituality calls you to isintu or to basically to Africanness. But the word Ubuntu actually means humanity, right? It means I'm human, right? Abantu, yes, we can say Bantu tribes, but it can also be a word that is referred to anyone who's human. Ubuntu, it's a human being. Ubuntu, it's basically having humanity, to see humanity in everyone. When you see a human being, whether it's Black or white, that you see a human being and you don't treat the person like a dog. And that is absolutely a biblical idea, because the Bible does tell us that we love your neighbors, you love yourself. That is absolutely Ubuntu, because Ubuntu says, I am because you are. And so it's very important that we base these things on facts, that we cannot just assume that the Bible is anti African, and not quote a scripture that actually says the Bible is anti African. So I thought that is just something that we need to just highlight, that people need to know. Now, she's obviously going to get into why African spirituality is inclusive. But initially, she said that uh, for her, all religions are bad. And now she's saying African spirituality is inclusive of all religions. That's what you're going to see. Now, from this point onwards, for the rest of the video, she's going to contradict everything that she said at the beginning of the video.
Anyone. You can be straight, you can be black, you can be white, you can be Asian, you can literally be anything. African spirituality makes room for you. African spirituality says, as you are enough. And
how can it be African spirituality if it's inclusive? Because if at least we can say it should be spirituality if it's inclusive. The minute it says African, it means this is a spirituality for Africans. So the European and everyone else, they're completely isolated. It's not inclusive until you move the word Africa and you just say spirituality. Then maybe we can pay attention and hear what you're trying to say. But if you remove Africa and then you say spirituality, then this is a universal concept. Now, how are you going to define something that's universal using just African terms and ancestors, which are just an expression of African culture? So she's going to start contradicting herself from this point.
And when I learned about, decolonization and unlearning a lot of things that we have learned through colonization, I also realized there and then that, Christianity was definitely a tool to subdue us as Black people, and I no longer wanted to be part of it. I wanted to get to know God through my own avenues, through the avenues that my ancestors practiced. And
how do you get to know God through your own avenues? I mean, that is, to me, so problematic. I mean, if there's a God, he should be the one that defines how we can get to him. I cannot grab God out there and then bring him down and say, Lord, I would like to get to know you via abusing people. I mean, is that not what the colonizers were doing? Right? The minute we want to control God and define him in our own way, because that's what they were doing, the colonizers. They were defining God based on their whiteness. They were defining God based on their culture. And maybe if their culture was racist, then they want to define Christianity and use Christianity to advance their agenda. That's precisely what you're doing. Even when you say African spirituality, you are actually calling on the same principle that led to slavery and colonization, when we define spirituality on the basis of our culture, right? It's the same problem that led to colonization and slavery, and she's now promoting it
in a way that truly resonates with me. And African spirituality makes room for that. A lot of people, when they think about African spirituality, is that they think it's just voodoo, it's witchcraft, all of these things. But it's not that. African spirituality is everything. African spirituality includes astrology, it includes communicating with your ancestors, it includes worshiping deities, yes, and it includes living in harmony with nature. Like, African spirituality basically makes room for everything. Whatever resonates with you as a person, African spirituality holds room for you.
whatever resonates with you as a person, African spirituality. I mean, this is so problematic, because one of the reasons why, for me, African spirituality is false, and you listen to a language, astrology. This is basically when you allow the reading of the stars and the moon and maybe stray stars, some stray stars that are going astray. Those stars are going to now define your life and determine the direction in which your life is going to go. You'll hear people saying, my star sign is Leo or a Cancer, and therefore I'm predetermined to function like this. But is it not God who should have sovereignty over my life, as opposed to saying there's the moon and the stars? I mean, the stars, They have no power. They have no creative power. Yes, they are very helpful to us to give us light and to give life to some of the things that we use, like food and so on. But the stars and the moon, those things cannot define your life, because guess what? The stars and the moon were created the same way that you were created. So how does creation define other forms of creation? Why should we not go to the creator? Number two, she says it's about being in harmony with nature. And then she says it's about connecting with deities. When are we connecting to the main deity, to God, to the creator? And this is why I say to people, it's not bringing you to God, it's bringing you to other people, your ancestors. It's bringing you to other creation, the stars and the moon. It's bringing you to God. This is idolatry. When it says gods, this is bringing you directly to idolatry. I don't want, the stars and the moon and my ancestors. I want the source. I want the creator. I want the person that made me, the person that shaped me, that formed me, because that's the person that has meaning. That's the person that will give my life meaning, because he is the one who knows why he put me here. He is the one who even can define who I am, what it is, this thing that we call a human being. It's only God really that can tell us and define all of those things. So to say that whatever it is that you want, African spirituality basically accommodates. I mean, how do you accommodate things that are contradicting each other, right? Let's say one person believes that it's the stars that determine your life, but one person believes it's the ancestors that determine your life. How do both the ancestors and the stars determine your life? What if the stars are saying left and the ancestors are saying right? So you can't have this worldview that has many things accommodated. In the end, you will actually end up undermining all of them, because all of them have a specific absolute truth that they hold. So they can't all be true at the same time. That's why we always say that Christianity will say, I'm the only way. And let's say African spirituality will say, yeah, Christ is one of the ways, but also the ancestors. They can't both be true. That's why you can't hold to African spirituality and Christianity, or to ancestors and Christianity, because they contradict each other. So really what it is that people are being invited to is to absolute confusion. And this confusion only happens when we come to God. But there's no confusion as to the left and the right, blue and white and green. Now people are trying to bring confusion as to what male and female is. But really, truth is always exclusive, and truth is always absolute. If something is true, then everything else is false, right? If something is green, it means it's not blue or purple or white. It's very important. And so this worldview for me, that actually has no morals, that has nothing that is right or wrong, that is just an exploration, whatever you feel like, however you want to define God. I mean, then how do we then condemn colonization? What if it was just their way of defining God? On what basis can we say it's right, if anyone has the freedom to define it? So those are my thoughts really about what she is saying. For me, the arguments about the Roman Catholic Church are completely unfair. It doesn't actually tell us the whole history of what really happened during colonization. We see that there are many African kingdoms that played a part in this thing. We see the kingdom of Egypt. Definitely there was a lot of slavery that happened there, lots of conquering, lots of politics. The pharaohs were very political, but at the same time, they considered themselves high priests. And they did very much evil things. I mean, some of the pharaohs actually were so evil that there was this rule that they came up with, that their servants and all the people that worked for them would actually get buried with them so that they can serve them in the afterlife. So we can't just take one narrative and then begin to build our own truth from that. We got to speak about all the facts and be honest about it. And also, even when we talk about the role of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, it's very important to know that even most Christians don't acknowledge the Roman Catholic Church as a Christian church. That's number one. Number two, our invitation is not to invite you to Christianity or to invite you to religion. Our invitation is to a relationship with Christ. It's not an invitation for you to now be a religious person. Now, it also depends what you define as religion. If you're talking about religion as something that you're going to do in order to get God's approval, there definitely it's not going to happen. And I think African spirituality is religious because it says if you slaughter, if you do XYZ, the ancestors will accept you. That for me is religion. It's completely different to a relationship where my acceptance is not on the basis of what I've done, but really it's on the basis of God's grace that He extends to me, His forgiveness. And that's the only way that this holy God and a sinful human being could actually be in a relationship. This God that in African spirituality we say is the supreme being who's distant. The only way that we can come into this relationship with Him is not on the basis of any human action that we can do, but on the basis of what God does for us. But if your definition, for an example, of religion is what James chapter 1, verse 27 says, the religion that is pure, the religion that the Father accepts, is to care for the widows, to love the orphans, and to meet them in their distress, and to keep yourself from corruption or the corruption of the world. Now, if that's what you're talking about, to say that I'm being religious not to be accepted, but I'm being religious to express what God has already done for me. So God has shown me kindness and grace, and therefore when I see a guy on the street, I show him mercy, even though he doesn't deserve it. I will bless that guy. I will give him my money, and so on. So if that's what you define as religious, then religion is not necessarily a bad thing. But being religious, if it's about control, if it's about power, if it's about conquering people, then that is definitely condemned in the Bible. So those are my thoughts about this, and want to hear you guys on the comment section. Love to hear what you think about this. I'll see you guys on the next video.